If you were to ask them, they'd tell you they were born to create, born to make beauty from ashes, to speak a higher language in art and craft, expressing some of the deepest and most insightful things in life in simple and cryptic fashion alike. Creatives. They live to do this and also make a living off doing it, skillfully turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. But now, like everyone else, they find themselves in anything but an ordinary situation, one that is not of their own making, the COVID-19 pandemic. What are they to do? Jobs have been lost, and jobs here are not to be seen as just jobs, but we should think of them as the servings on our plates, the roofs of our heads and the cloths on our backs, as well as the reason that many wake up and face another day. We now wonder, what is the way forward for the creative industry in the wake of the pandemic? What challenges are there and what needs are there are being brought to the fore? And what opportunities and solutions are available and how can they be tapped into? Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of the Nation Leadership Forum, where we are focusing on the creative economy in the context of this coronavirus pandemic. My name is Dan Mwangi and I have a virtual panel joining me to break down the issues and give a glimpse of what the future holds. First and foremost, we have Dr. Amina Mohammed, Ambassador, who is the CS, the Cabinet Secretary in the Ministry of Sports, Culture and Heritage, and she's tasked with playing a leading role in attending to the lives and livelihoods we're discussing. Thank you for joining us, Madam CS. And next year we have a man who's no foreigner to many of us, and that is Dr. Ezekiel Mutua, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya Film and Classification Board, and he will help us understand what our parameters are as we journey into this season. Now, aside from that, from the two, we also have George Gashara, who's the managing partner of Hiva Fund, and he will be helping us in discussions around investments, training, and much more. So, George, thank you for joining us. And we shall also be speaking to June Gashui, who is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, and also and she specializes in intellectual property and entertainment law. She's also the founder of JGIP Consultants, as well as an artist, that is a singer, event MC, thespian, name it. And so we shall be looking into these different resources, as we put it that way, who are going to be giving us insight into what we need to look into in regards to the creative economy. And just to make it clear, it is not limited to what is easily called the low-hanging fruit, the musicians, the actors. We also have a lot more when it comes to interior design, graphic design, the sculptors, name it. And so we shall be seeking to address the issues around them in this time of the pandemic. Thank you all for joining us. Now, to get some context into the discussion, let's look at some data related to the creative industry. First, Hiva Fund has done a survey on the COVID-19 resilience, creative industry and options and strategy. Here are some of the findings. Now, first of all, they found that 80% are not registered with any government entity relevant to their sector. That's 8 in every 10 creatives are not registered with any government agency that's relevant to their sector. Aside from that, Hiva's survey also found that 61% of creatives do not belong to any CCI organization. That's a creative and cultural industry organization that is relevant to their sector. So we find many of these people are not registered in any bodies, either government or private sector. Aside from that, Hiva also found that 68% of these individuals are operating as freelancers or as individuals, meaning that they did not have per se job security, they did not have employment, they are largely on contracts and the likes. Now, aside from that, the study also found that 73% are described their first quarter, the usual first quarter of business activity, as a low season. And we'll be getting to this to understand what low season means in regards to numbers in terms of revenue. And aside from that, 97% of these businesses are directly affected by the pandemic slowdown. 97%, it means that 3% is a very small group of those people who are in this sector. Now, aside from that, and one of the final things we'll highlight from the Hiva study is that 76% of these businesses registered instances of financial loss in incomes of up to 500,000 shillings in the first quarter. 500,000 shillings, and that is a large that's more than 3/4, just over 3/4 of these people. Now, we also have a study that has been done by the Event Organizers Association of Kenya, which is called the Impact of COVID-19 Pandemic in the Events Industry in Kenya. And this is just between January to March 2020. And they say that they have lost 110 million shillings, I beg your pardon, from the 144 businesses that they sampled. And that is an average of 748,299 each on average. And 921 events have been cancelled. That means for each of them, for each of the businesses, they've lost about 6 events per business, 6 to 7 events per business. And the last statistic we look at from this sample of statistics is that 4% of the 147 businesses can withstand containment measures for over 3 months. That means 96% of the businesses cannot withstand containment measures which go over 3 months. And this has been part of the conversation around which I know Health CS Mutahi Kagwe referred to when he was speaking earlier today, in terms of people talking about opening up the economy. So these are some of the things we are going to look into as we get into this discussion. And now I'd like to just welcome once again my panel of 4 from the CS. And we'll just begin with the CS. Madam CS, from where you sit, we've seen some of these statistics and they look, they're a bit disheartening, to be realistic, but it is not an isolated case, an isolated industry. From where you sit, what kind of numbers are we looking at? What kind of report have you gotten of how badly off or how well off the creative industry players are?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm really happy that you started off with the HIVA study because we agree with that study totally, and it exposes the hardship that those in the creative sector are actually exposed to as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We had occasion with George Gashara to look at this study in some detail, compare it to the figures that we had, and found the study to have been spot on. Yeah? So in fact, we requested and got the permission to use that study in all our conversations going forward, including the conversations on support to this sector. And it's really clear that in the first quarter, a lot of resources were lost. But I think during the first quarter, there was still a little bit of activity that was ongoing. I think the losses are much greater now, and the hardship that they're experiencing is much more than they did before. And that's the reason why His Excellency, the President, set aside the 100 million shilling fund to cushion them, ensure that they continue developing their talent, even during this difficult time, nurturing their talent, so that they do not stop doing what they love so much to do. And you are right. I think that what they do supports all of us in one way or another. I mean, from the clothes that we wear, to the music that we listen to the art that we have in our offices and homes. What they do lives with us every single day of our lives, and that's why they're so deserving of the kind of support that His Excellency provided to them. Now, because of the hardship they're going through, we've had discussions, and I think George may address that a little later on. We've had discussions on requesting the private sector to actually match the 100 million that the government has provided, and we have some really good news coming up. We've got very good pledges, and I'll let George tell us what the result of the pledges will be, and when we can actually launch that as well. Now, my challenge actually is that during this phase 1 of the applications, and I spoke about this a while back, we've only received 8,780 or so, applications, across the different cadre. And I want to encourage our creatives to continue applying because the first phase ends on Sunday. And so we have a little bit of time to accept additional applications. The second phase will include actually a road run where we would be recording and also engaging directly artists. As we said, we want to make sure that this is shared across the country, and we want to be able to have the creatives from across the 47 counties. And so we'll actually be going across the country to visit with them, to record, to pay them for the work that they would have done. I also want to correct a misconception that's out there. And the misconception is that we will only accept work that relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. That's not correct, and I think I have spoken to that. The PS in the Department of Culture has also spoken to that, indicating that in fact we will accept any material that obviously is kosher and that gives us hope, but also builds on the optimistic nature of our people, talks about our culture, talks about our traditions and our values, and any work that may have been done in the course of this year will be accepted.
Okay.
So let me just encourage everybody to continue applying until Sunday, and then we will open up the second phase. And please do that, because we will get support from the corporate sector. But there's no point in asking for additional support if we are not getting the number of applications that we would like to see.
All right, and just to, you've said that it is going to be any work that is done not necessarily related to COVID-19. Is there available the criteria for which, what would make me qualify, apart from saying it can cover any topic?
Actually, there are no hard requirements. There are no hard requirements. This is intended to cushion all creatives, yeah. And so we would like people to apply. Don't look at any requirements, just apply, because we haven't set any hard criteria for applying for these funds. We want to have a higher uptake than we are having right now. Yeah? And so please, submit your proposals, apply for the resources. We don't want these resources to go back to Treasury at the end of June. So, let's use these resources that have been provided so generously by His Excellency the President.
All right, thank you very much, Madam CS. And I want to get to Dr. Mutua now. KFCB, is one of the things that you champion for is for the safety of children in terms of the content, and just, trying to make sure that the content that's put out there is acceptable. All the controversies aside, what are some of the challenges or some of the situations we are finding ourselves in now? Because, for instance, we've seen people are already churning out content which is not, let me say, not palatable. What is being done about that, and what is the situation?
Thank you, Dan. Just before I come to the safety of children and the inappropriate content that they are being exposed to because of the now new digital space that we are in, let me agree with the CS and George that indeed COVID has affected the industry in a very big way. I think when you look at the EVA Fund survey, one of the areas that I think maybe has not been captured clearly, and probably George can expound, is cinema theaters. We regulate the cinema theaters, and this week I did a meeting with the cinema operators, and their story is painful. I mean, these are people pay rent to run those big platforms and spaces. Now with COVID-19, they cannot get clients because this is an industry or an area that relies on crowds. And we are now waiting for the global release of new films across the world in July. And we are now strategizing to see what kind of guidelines can we put in place to ensure that we save the cinema theaters and the cinema operators do not continue to suffer loss. As of last week when we had a meeting, this week when we had a meeting with them, they say they have lost 80 million within the period between March and today. And that's a lot of money. And even if they were to start, they will have to start with limited crowds, probably 50%, and all the measures on sanitization, social distancing, and so on and so forth. But we are working. We have a meeting this coming Friday with the President of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the cinema operators to see how we can work on protocols and guidelines that we can share with the ministry to ensure that we can start sensitization so that by July, when the new releases come out, our cinema theaters in Kenya are able to operate. But coming back to your question about child online safety, obviously with the COVID-19, all eyes and entertainment is directed to the screens because children are not able to socialize, have entertainment in school or in other forms as they used to do through socialization, and there is increased eyeballs on the screens, And that comes with its own challenges. The attendant challenges that we are facing right now is regulation of the internet, where children are being exposed to bullying, to pedophilia, and other inappropriate and unpalatable content. And our challenge has been the adults and the producers who are doing these things and producing content that sometimes even veers into the arena of the platforms being used by children. And sometimes out of curiosity, children end up getting exposed badly. So we've had to flag out a lot of material, a lot of content that is inappropriate. We've had to work with Google and Communications Authority of Kenya. Right now we have set up technical committees with Google and the Communications Authority of Kenya, and working with the Directorate of Criminal Investigation to say, let us target the adults who are producing this inappropriate content. We must keep our children safe. Yes, technology is now the new way of doing business, but let us use it responsibly. And another thing that we are doing with Google is a program that we are calling digital parenting. Because one of the challenges we are realizing right now, most parents are digitally ignorant and illiterate. The children are far ahead. They are doing all manner of things with their gadgets, and in the process, the parents are left behind, and they do not even know. And our call has been, parents, please monitor what your children are watching. Ensure that you have a conversation. The idea is not to take away the gadgets from them, but we're also saying we cannot allow the campaign for e-learning and the promotion of technology to jeopardize the moral perspectives of our children. If you look at what is happening in Singapore, even they have to suspend the e-learning, because when they went on Zoom, kids are being bullied, kids are being harassed, and I think the welfare of our children is fundamental. It's a constitutional issue, and all of us, the creators, distributors, broadcasters, we must collaborate, which is why we are so grateful to have this kind of forum where we can discuss collaboration, interagency collaboration, and collaboration with the private sector to ensure that we keep our children safe.
Thank you very much, Dr. That's some good context of understanding some of the challenges that are emerging now, that we are in a very, very online-based, so to speak, and internet-based situation where it is not like the television where I am going to, you know, put off the TV when I need my children to stop watching. And I just want to now move on to to Gashara. And Gashara, you deal with funding and the likes, you know, and I know I did some research on what you'd spoken about, and you said that with most of the affected people are reaching out to you, those who you've provided funding with, and for every 60-day period, you're losing about 20 million shillings because of having to reduce some of the loans and the likes. Now, because of you've done a research, part of which we sampled at the beginning, maybe you could tell us of all these creatives, because like I said, many times we think of the musicians, the actors, the dancers, name it, but when you talk about these creatives, who are the most exposed to COVID right now, and who are the ones who are somewhat safe because they may not receive as hard a hit as others? Maybe you can kind of like rank them for us.
Well, thank you, Dan, for this invitation. This is the latest I have been outside my house for the last 3 months, so thank you for the treat.
Welcome to the life.
But I would like to start I'd like to start at a point of mindfulness. I'd like to say that this is a very tough moment, and even before we start to speak about finances, it's important for us to acknowledge that there are a lot of people who are suffering. There are people who have lost their relatives and loved ones. There are people who've lost a lot of their income. And there are people who are really stressed and uncertain about the future. And these are the people that we are talking about behind the numbers, behind the policies, and to stand in solidarity with them to say that indeed we are together in this. So thank you for the opportunity, for allowing us to talk about our friends, our relatives, our favorite artists who are going through very difficult times right now. And second, I'd like to acknowledge the panelists who've spoken before us. CS Amina, thank you for your collaboration. Thank you for listening to us a couple of times. Now we've even become friends. Thank you for supporting the sector. For Dr. Ezekiel, we've been on this journey a long way. So thank you for your contribution, and especially the remarks that you have just made around the difficult context that we exist in, and actually the future being digital. Dan, you asked me the question of vulnerability. Who is vulnerable right now? I'd like to say three things. The first thing is that, as you've noted, that majority of our artists, producers, artisans are freelance individuals who have no social protection. They are not affiliated to institutions, so they are vulnerable. And if 80% of them tell you that they've been severely impacted by COVID, that means they've lost more than 60% of their revenue. If I asked you today, if you lost 60% of your salary, would you be able to lead the same kind of lifestyle or life that you have? That's a majority. Over 70% of our artists across the country, they've lost more than 60% of their revenues. So it is a very stressful time across board. So you also ask me to give sort of an analysis of who is most affected. For us at HIVA, we did this study, and we talked to more than 514 practitioners across the country and across all genres. And what was interesting for us is that if you look at COVID, at least the impact of COVID and the characteristics of the industry, you realize that there are some sectors that are dependent on large gatherings. And a lot of my panelists have said that. They are dependent on close human interaction. They are dependent on some form of travel. They are dependent on either grants or some public expenditure. They are dependent on international logistics. And sometimes, if a sector has all these factors going on, their exposure to COVID is very high. I'll give you an example. Take, for example, a musician or a person who plays at Simas or at Mercury or at or Nairobi West. They play live music every Thursday and every Saturday. You ask yourself, does their livelihood depend on large gathering? I say yes. Does their livelihood depend on close human interaction? Yes, both on the consumer part and the rest of the band. Does their livelihood depend on travel? Yes. They have to go to Kawasukari where they live, or Nakuru where their parents live. Does their livelihood depend on public expenditure? You realize a lot of live music is hosted in national events, at the launch of different meetings. So a lot of live musicians perhaps get a big percentage of their revenues from corporate spending in events and public sector expenditure. Do they depend on international logistics? So where do they get their instruments? Where do they get their artists? So these factors put together, we find there are many sectors that are hardly hit, and I would say live music is one of them. Theater is another one. DJ performance is another one. Live entertainment, weddings, supplies, museums, galleries, tours and travel. So we have a whole section of people who are losing jobs, who are losing incomes, and whose cost of operation is high. So it's a really difficult time for most of them.
As we can imagine, it must be a difficult one, and I think we'll get into that in a bit more, but just understanding that we've got such a wide range of artists, and I want to quickly bring in June. And June, just briefly, aside from being an advocate of the High Court, you're also yourself a performer. You're one of the people who's been directly affected by this pandemic. Maybe just give us briefly, before we take a break in a minute or so, what has it been like for you? Because we want to kind of hear the first-hand experience.
Thank you so much, Dan. I think, as my distinguished panelists have already said, this has been unprecedented for a lot of us. You've asked me to share my personal experience. I can tell you can already see I'm wearing a head wrap. Usually I would be showing off my natural hair, but we have been able to look for alternatives that is also helping to improve and encourage and promote the artistry and the fashion industry in our country. So we adapt very well. It's been difficult. We've had a lot of performances that were scheduled for this particular period of time that we've had to cancel due to the government directives caused by the pandemic. That is a global issue. We've also had a lot of our team members. A word I like to use a lot is the ecosystem, and I think the panelists before me have actually alluded to that, that there is an ecosystem around each and every one of us. So everybody in my ecosystem, it's not just me, for example. I would work with a team of at least 20 to 30 at any time when we are producing a live event or getting on stage to do a play or getting on stage to do an improv comedy show. The lighting crew, the guys who build the set, the guys who do the audiovisual work, the script writers, the dancers, the choreographers. It's usually a collective effort that brings out this beautiful piece of art. So we have been affected monetarily as well. And honestly, we've been praying. We're grateful for some of the interventions that we're seeing coming through now, because it really just justifies and it validates the fact that this is an industry. It's no longer a hobby. It's no longer something people do on the side because God blessed them with talent. It's actually a business, and I'm really grateful that we're having this conversation tonight.
All right, thank you very much, June, and we shall be getting to some of the other issues in regards to now. That was more of an overall view now, policy and some of the nitty-gritties for people to understand so that we can know where we stand and where the creatives can actually, try and seek help or invest in or just, put their energies towards. We take our first break on the NLF of edition this week, which is on the creative industry and the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll be back and we continue with our discussion with our 4 panelists who are joining us virtually. Like I said, the CS for Sports, Culture and Heritage, that's Dr. Amina Mohammed. We have the KFCB CEO, Ezekiel Mutua, George Gashara, who's the managing partner of Hiva Fund, as well as June Gashui, who is the founder of JGIP Consultants. I just want to speak first of all, I just want to, we mentioned about pledges, and I think Gashara, the CS, had said that you are going to touch on, sounds like to make an announcement about the private sector coming in to probably match the 100 million shillings. Maybe just make that clear for just briefly.
Well, I'd like to say that in this ecosystem, there's a lot of need. And the first and most important need is to, during the emergency, to help people access livelihoods, access some food, shelter. And we've seen the government putting 100 million that should go, and that there's a process to make it available for the most needy people within the creative industries. And we are very grateful for that. And as Hiva, we have made an estimation together with the ministry that there will be a need for around 2 billion shillings to go in to plug the gaps, the revenue gaps, and so on and so forth. And so the first action of goodwill has already happened. And so we encourage private sector, we encourage the development partners to chip in. As Hiva, and in conversation with our board and our investors, and also in consultation with the government of Kenya, we've already put aside 100 million shillings that will not go now to artists and individuals, but will now go to businesses. So Hiva, for the last several years, 5 years, we've been investing in creative industries. And so the first group of people that we are looking to stabilize are the 40 businesses that are already holding our resources and our investments. And then we'll put up 100 million shillings that dynamic businesses that have strategies to transform even after the COVID crisis can start to use these loan facilities to transform their businesses. But this is just a drop in the ocean. And so together with the government, we are leading a campaign where we are asking corporate sector, players, development finance, to chip in either through debt facilities, either through grants, either through jobs, so that we can start to lift the burden of a very hard-pressed sector. Okay. So our announcement is such that in the next couple of weeks, if Mutahi Kagwe opens Nairobi and Kenya, we'll be able to reopen our businesses. And as the businesses reopen, they will need capital. And Hiva Fund will be ready to receive applications for debt finance, especially for creative industry businesses in the way that they've already built a relationship on how to apply on our online platforms and so on and so forth.
All right, thank you very much. That's some good news, and we look forward to more people joining. They just wanted to add something?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just extremely grateful to the Hiva Fund. When I went to them with the proposal that they should support the efforts that government is making, I did not expect that they would fully match the 100 million. The idea was that they have the convening power and that they would get others to come forward. As you know, every time I've spoken directly to the corporate world and asked them to come in and support us. I think we all need to come together in a concerted effort to support the creative sector. The sector serves all of us. It serves individuals, it serves corporate, and it also serves the public sector. So I think all of us are indebted to the creatives and must come forward and support them. Now, with our 100 million, I think you know we already have talked to everybody. I think about how we're going to roll that out. I'm very, very happy that George will be there immediately after the pandemic, starts coming to an end, to support businesses. Yeah. Okay. So it's almost a seamless way of working together, the public and private sector. The public sector puts forward what we have, and the private sector comes in to actually support businesses. I think that this is probably one of the best models that we have seen. Okay. But it is also, I think, a normal progression from the resources that were provided by government. I think you know that, in fact, this is the first time on the continent and probably outside the continent as well, that a government has actually supported the creative sector in the way that we are with this grant that the government has provided. Okay. And we have received a lot of kudos from across the world. And now when we go out and say, look, our 100 million was actually matched by the private sector, I think that would have broken all records. So I'm really grateful to the Hiva Fund for having come forward.
All right. And when you talk about just making business easier for the different creatives, one of the things that we had spoken to CS YCT Joe Musheru about a week and a half ago, and he said that KFCB, for instance, for the filming license fees, they're going to be waived. Dr. Mutua, is this already in place, or is it something that is still a work in progress?
Absolutely, Dan. We have had to put in place mechanisms to ensure that we support the industry. We give them reliefs. Some of them had taken licenses to do their shoots. They anticipated that they would do it in March, in April, in May, and there were interruptions. And as you know that we charge even some money per day per shoot, and we had to relax some of those rules to ensure that where the filmmakers have been interrupted because of COVID-19 restrictions and they were not able to complete their projects within the given time, we extend those licenses as a matter of course. And we have discussed with the CS to see also the needy cases that need our support based on the compliance and the nature of films that they are doing. Yesterday, we had a good meeting with the Director General of the KWS, where a lot of filming activities for the wildlife takes place. And we have agreed to come up with a structure post-COVID-19 that will support the filmmakers who are using our wildlife and shooting their films in our national parks to ensure that they are supported. Most of the times when we get requests from KTB and the Ministry of Tourism to support projects that are related to building Brand Kenya using our wildlife, our flora and fauna, we actually give gratis license. And there are a lot of cases that we have received like that we have given gratis license, because we think for now, what is most critical is to support this industry to survive this period. And we cannot be the impediment as a government. So even though regulation is critical, we are saying that we must support in terms of relaxing the regulatory rules and requirements to ensure that case by case, we support them to survive. Even sometimes we are supporting some projects. There is a company that employed 50 people. I think they're called Viewfinders, and they shoot in Masai Mara and so on. And they use a lot of the communities around the national park. And we realize now those communities, the employees that they have, are now suffering, and some of them have no food because they depend on this company. And we've had to get into an MOU to say, how do we support even the communities around the national parks so that they survive COVID-19, so that when we resume, this company will go back, pick their vehicles and the drivers and the crews that go with them, and they will be alive and well, and they'll be able to participate in making of the films. The other thing that we are doing, of course, is to ensure that for public events, because they are not taking place right now, those who are using Nairobi Cinema, for example, for their public performances, and they end paid, we will keep that contract past COVID-19. And when the rules are relaxed and we are back to business, we will not charge them afresh until they utilize the amount of money that they pay to us. Obviously, of course, collaborating with the CA, collaborating with the communication, with the Kenya Film Commission and our Ministry of Sports, Culture and Heritage, and other stakeholders, and what CS Musheru is doing at the Ministry of ICT, Innovations and Youth, in supporting and creating an ecosystem of partners, both in the private and public sector, to ensure that we care about these people. I think what is critical right now as we go through COVID-19 is to ensure that we get the statistics, and I'm so grateful to see what George has done, because one of the things that we have been lacking is the statistics. So even when you are formulating policy to support, you don't know how many people are in this area. Remember in 1916, I introduced the idea of licensing photographers and even the guys who are doing weddings. This is big business.
Yes.
The idea was not to bring them down, it was to know how many of our youths are involved every weekend in shooting weddings, in photography and so on, and how can we, using those statistics, work with them. I'll be doing a meeting with the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority Director General next week on 9th, and his team, also to look at in terms of drones and other equipment that are used for film making. How do we relax the rules? How do we collaborate so that we make it easy for film making post-COVID-19? And the whole idea is to ensure that come post-COVID-19, we are not starting by arresting people or harassing people. We are starting by having a framework of collaboration where they will find an ease of doing business and support from their government and from the regulator.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. I want to come to June for a bit. And when you talk about enabling the artists and the creatives, so to speak, one of the things that happens that you find there are, and this is something I guess the CS will also weigh in on, part of the creatives are under CS Amina Mohamed's docket. There's a part of it that is under Joe Musheru's. And that balance becomes tricky and it leaves them exposed. So what is the kind of experience that you as artists have had? And as an advocate, what are the exposures that are presented by this situation?
All right, thank you, Dan. You've actually raised an interesting point. The word we've been speaking about is harmonization. And I think if I could just give you a very simple example, the people who create, the creatives, the cultural industry players and creators are usually found under CS Amina's docket, the Sports, Culture and Heritage Ministry. That's our mom, that's our parent ministry. The thing that we create is a work of intellectual property, and therefore it would be protected under the Copyright Act, for example. And that is currently under the Attorney General's, if I read the document that was released yesterday, executive order correctly, under the Attorney General's. But the thing that we have created is then exploited on platforms such as broadcasting, television and radio platforms and digital platforms, which are then comfortably sitting under the Ministry of ICT. So I write my song, I produce it, it's a final product, I register it with the Kenya Copyright Board, I get my copyright registration done and protection there, and then it is played on radio, my videos are played on TV, or my music is streamed on various platforms. And if anything goes wrong, I have to run for relief and for help under another ministry and another agency. And one of the things that has been discussed quite extensively is the ability to harmonize some of the linkages between these particular ministries and even our statutes. One of the examples I use quite a bit is when I'm doing my workshops and teaching is the definition of something like film or an audiovisual work. You will find it in the Kenya Information and Communications Act. You will find it in CAP 222, which is the Film and Stage Plays Act. You will also find it in the Copyright Act. And therefore, you can imagine as a creative who is not a lawyer, there could be a lot of confusion, and yet we could very easily, in my opinion, find a way to smoothen and level the playing field so that it makes it easier. When I enter this industry, I alluded to the fact earlier that a lot of us enter the creative space because of a God-given talent. However, the transition from talent to business requires that there's an enabling environment. And we start, of course, when we look at the legal provisions, we look at the regulatory agencies that exist, we look at all the aspects of the ecosystem that allow this one creative to thrive. And so I do think that there's a lot of movement. We had the Copyright Act amended. I believe it came into force in October of 2019. Prior to that, the statute we were using was from 2001. So these are just a few examples to show that, yes, we've seen a little bit of progress, but we have a lot more work to do. And I speak, sort of always alternating the hats that I'm wearing because I feel I am privileged because I understand the law and I just happen to also be a decently talented creative performer. And therefore I've been able to marry the two quite well and take care of my business where my creative arts are concerned.
All right.
My business turned 10 years this month, Dan. And I have survived purely on intellectual property and entertainment law business in my firm. That tells you for the last 10 years that there have been people who have chosen to work in this space, and the potential is much, much greater than what we have seen. All
right, thank you very much. And I want to bring in the CS just to respond to this. We are seeing like the situation that creatives are in, they are kind of spread out. One, do we have a creative policy, a creatives policy, one document that can actually be a guiding light to all these creatives, even as much as they are spread out across government in terms of who they are answerable to?
Well, I agree with what June has said. There is quite a bit of fragmentation, and I've seen that since I came to the ministry and I started dealing with different artists. And what we're trying actually to do now is to talk to our stakeholders. We have been doing that since last year, to revamp all the laws, revamp all the policies, because you also have to understand then that there have been so many technological advances, there have been so many changes that have taken place, in a very short period of time. So even policies that were formulated 5 years ago are becoming almost irrelevant, right, to this space, because this space has seen so much growth. This space, as June has said, has amazing potential. Currently, it contributes 6% to our GDP. And I think that with the proper support system, the proper environment, the proper ecosystem created, and a proper value chain for this sector, that you'd see a much bigger contribution to our GDP. So what we have done is we have had our discussions. In fact, 2 policies are already in cabinet and waiting for cabinet's approval. We have the draft culture bill, and that is already gone through the PSC's committee and is coming now to cabinet. So hopefully, when these policies are formulated and this bill is actually enacted into law, you'll see that some of the discrepancies will not be as visible and as problematic as they are today. We have harmonized quite a bit. We also have a policy of a whole of government approach. And so we have no challenges actually discussing these issues across ministries. My colleague Joe Musheru has been very, very forthcoming whenever issues have arisen, and we have been able to resolve them very quickly. So I don't think that even the problem would be that the Film Commission is there and copyright is somewhere else. I think as long as we have a proper coordinating mechanism, right, within our ministries and operating as as government that is operating together in its entirety, that we shouldn't have any issues addressing some of the challenges that may have arisen in the past.
Okay.
Let me also say this, that we need for the artists to also be able to come together. We want them to register. If you had me on 3 weeks ago, I actually announced a waiver for the registration of artists within our Department of Culture, as well as within the PPMC. There is a fee that is paid of 500, and we waived that because, again, of the period that we are in. And the expectation that I had then was that we would then have better registration of artists, so that we can plan for them, so that we know how to engage with them, so that it's much, much easier to actually coordinate between themselves, the private sector, civil society, with everybody. Okay. But we haven't had an upsurge of registration. So again, today I'm appealing that people actually come forward and register. It's very, very simple. It's online, but we need to know the numbers. The study by HEVA indicated that 69%, and I think it's even more than that, are not registered.
Yes.
Only 31% are registered. So you cannot plan with those, that level of registration. And therefore, we're encouraging, our artists to come forward, access the funds that are available, but also register so that we know that you exist.
Okay.
And so that we can plan on how to provide support to you, but also create the environment that you can thrive in, right? I think if we can engage more, we can engage better, and we can engage smarter, some of the issues that keep recurring will be dealt with.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam CS. We take our second short break here, and we shall be getting back into some of these issues in a very short while. Stay there. Thank you once again for staying with us on this Nation Leadership Forum that we are discussing the creative industry in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're already getting some of the answers to some of the questions and just clarifications from the industry, that is from the artists and also as well as the people who bring financing, that there'll be more funding even post-COVID. That's some of the things we've picked up. And even from the government in regards to how to streamline the creative space so that it can have a bit more impact and even have more investment going into it. And I want to bring in George. Because before we went for the break, we'd mentioned a bit about the issues of financing and the likes. Now, looking forward, how do we raise the next generation of creatives? What needs to be looked at? What are some of the important things to bring out?
Well, I'd like to first say that we have to get a picture in our minds, or when we talk about who is the next generation. And you don't get to next generation until you realize who we are right now. So if you look at Kenya, we are more than 50 million people going by the last census, close to 47 million people. Our median age in this, 47? Yes, 47 million people, and our median age in this country is 19. So in the next 30 years, that's until 2050, we are still going to be young. That the future generation of this country, some of them are alive today, that the person born today in 30 years will still be young, and it will be still in my lifetime. So then the other thing that you have to look at is what is our ecosystem looking like? Kenya right now is leading the world in mobile phone penetration, internet penetration amongst the young people. So we are mobile first, we are content first, we have ease of doing business, we have ease of access to digital content. So how then do we allow the current group of young people to be productive right now as entrepreneur within the e-commerce and digital space, but also create room for future growth? And these are conversations that we've had even with Waziri and with many players, that first we have to give people the tools. We have to allow them to learn the best technologies in this world, so they can make gaming, so that education can be mobile, so that healthcare can be in the mobile space, so that then we just don't look at creative industries as entertainment. So the first thing we have to think about is skills. We have to also look at technology and access to technology. And the other thing is to look at access to digital markets. If you look at the contribution of what we call digital economy to the Kenyan economy is 10%. That can be scaled. If more Kenyans can make gaming, you can sell gaming across the world through Google platforms. So it's the collaborations that Waziri and Dr. Ezekiel Mutua are talking about, that we do research collaborations with the best in the world. We do co-production agreements with the best in the world, that we collaborate with Google so that Kenyans can sell on Google App Store, and that we charge better digital incomes from Jumia, from Viewsasa, from YouTube, from these streaming platforms, and reinvent this back into production, into learning. Because if you think about a 19-year-old, you need to give them skills, you need to give them market access, and you also need to give them capacity support to be able to exploit this. Okay. So I think this is the framework of thinking about the future.
All right, thank you very much. That's some good insight. Sienso, to add on that?
Yeah. I think that technology, and obviously I think with the pandemic, we are moving much faster into the digital space than we would have ever done. But as a ministry, what we have actually done is, first of all, obviously, we've added value to the curriculum in schools to make sure that, that space is also taken care of. Culture, the heritage, the arts, all that is included in our curricula, right from primary with the CBC to secondary, and then of course beyond that. So that's one way in which we are contributing to making sure that the next generation is actually aware of this space, but also that we support the nurturing of their talent, their God-given talent. We are also at the Permanent Presidential Music Commission offering space and equipment to young upcoming artists who do not have the space and don't have obviously the equipment to practice, to record. We have a studio there. We do about 10,000 every year, and we want to scale that. Up. We have agreed that apart from the National Museum and the Kenya Cultural Center providing space for young artists to practice, but also to peer review, we also have agreed that we are going to use all the idle space that we have, whether it's in the Kenya National Library Services, the museum, the Kenya Cultural Center, whether it's in any of the other spaces that we have. We're going to allow artists to use that space, that idle space, and we are innovating quite a few of those spaces to make sure that they have the space and the space to practice, to produce, and obviously then to commercialize their goods and their services. So we're doing quite a bit to make sure that this happens. We also know about obviously the music and drama festivals. In fact, our school drama festivals are the largest cultural event. It's the biggest cultural event on the continent. it has 130,000 participants.
Okay.
So through that, we also nurture talent, and then post-school, we have the Music and Cultural Festival that we have every year. So there's no shortage of initiatives, right, and fora where we can actually nurture talent. Now, what we need is to have a partnership with the private sector. Currently, we have a budget from government of 2 billion to the Department of Culture. This is this year's budget. We also have obviously the arts and sports arts and social development fund that also allows us to invest in that space, but also to ensure that the facilities that will be used are
if I may just politely interject, Madam CS, briefly. A lot of what we have spoken about sounds fairly Nairobi urban area centric. There's some disparity. We've got artists here, for instance, we've seen artists who've done full live concerts online and had a lot of traction, and they had a lot of viewership in the tens of thousands. We have the person who's not a musician. They probably are having to craft, they're sculptors or something, and they're in a place that probably don't have the good internet access, and they're not having the good internet access. How are we making it a level playing field? What are we doing to accommodate those guys so they can also get a level playing field? Because it sounds flowery for those of us who are in Nairobi with good internet access, a privileged group.
But you know that we have museum spaces across the country. You know that we have libraries across the country. We have discussions now with the county governments because, by law, both county and central government is supposed to contribute to arts and culture. I mean, our constitution actually demands that in Article 11. So we're having all these conversations. We do not intend to focus only on Nairobi, right? Although obviously a large percentage of artists actually are here, either because they're Nairobians or they moved from other parts of the country to Nairobi. But we intend to use all our idle space across the country, and that is that's not small space. We will make sure that even with the funds that we are putting at the disposal of artists now, as I told you, we're going to have a roadshow across the country so that we have artists from the 47 counties. In fact, maybe to just end the conversation, I'd like to tell you that what we are doing has received so much international acclaim that the World Health Organization has recognized what we are doing as a dignity project, a project that gives dignity to the creatives, to artists. So no, we don't intend to only focus on Nairobi. We intend to make sure that all our artists, wherever they are, get the support that they need and the environment that they need to be able to achieve the potential that they have. We may go for a show with you maybe one of these days, either to Mombasa at For Jesus, so that you can see. But you also have the Swahili box. You know about it, right? Yeah. So you have the Swahili box, which is very, very successful at the coast. Okay. And so we have initiatives across the country.
All right. And Dr. Mutua, a lot of film, like we've said, is happening also in Nairobi, more than we are seeing it in other places. Now, my question is, what is being done to ensure that it's also a favorable environment? You've mentioned about the aspects of waiving taxes and the likes, but do you feel yourself from where you see there's even more need for more incentives, because it feels like there's not as much incentives when it's in as far as getting equipment and the likes?
Dan, let me start by first supporting what the CS and George have said. The future post-COVID-19 lies in partnerships, collaboration, and networking. That is not just true for the film industry for the creative economy, but for all sectors of the economy. It will not be just working in silos, operating alone. I think post-COVID-19, it will require interagency collaboration and organizations to come together, government and private sector, government agencies, versus government agencies, and so on, so that we can create an ecosystem that will be ready to support the industry to grow. And so the collaboration is very critical. That's why I said yesterday we had a meeting with the Director General, Brigadier Waweru of KWS, because these parks are spread across the country to see post-COVID-19, how do we facilitate the national filmmakers who use our local crews to ensure that they support the local growth of the creative economy and the film industry. Yes. But more importantly, Dan,
yes,
we are working with the Minister of Education, and when Siazamina was there, we signed a partnership for Kenya Film Classification Board to be the main partner in sponsoring the Kenya National Drama and Film Festival. We've done that for 2 years in a row. We were interrupted by COVID-19. We would be doing now probably the nationals. We had started with the counties, and we decided to spread these activities from the ECD to the primary school, to secondary school, to colleges, all the way to university, so that we can identify and nurture talent. But as we do so, being a regulator of the industry that is charged with promoting our culture, our values, and national aspirations, to ensure that we make our filmmakers and our artists from that young age to know that talent is not about bad manners. Talent is not about obscenity. It doesn't have to be dirty to sell. That you can create good music and make money out of good music. You can create good films and make money. It doesn't have to be vulgar or obscene for you to make money. And so that collaboration with the Minister of Education and using our school system to identify and nurture talent is very critical. And lastly, we are doing a program called Cinema Mashinani, which is spread again across the country, where we go to the remotest areas. One of the films that I told you we are supporting and working with one of our partners is being shot in Isiolo. We've done Simale from Isiolo, working with the county governments, working with the county government of Machakos and others to ensure that we identify and nurture talent. But it's got to be collaboration so that there is synergy between what the county governments are doing and what the national government is doing. There is synergy between the developers and private sector, like what George is doing, and what regulators are doing. And from where I sit, as I conclude, our message to the creative economy is that it doesn't have to be dirty to sell. That art must reflect our culture. Art should tell the stories of Kenya. When we had a meeting with Brigadier Waweru yesterday, he was almost agitated, and getting annoyed that we have such beautiful sceneries, our wildlife, and the stories that we can tell about the beauty of our country. But we concentrate on negative stories, and our stories become toxic when we are ignoring what God has given us. And we want the future of our children to be a future where the young creatives that George is talking about will be rooted in their culture. They will be proud of telling the Kenyan story and the African story, and they don't have to look to the West and bring foreign cultures to our country so that they can become popular. You can be famous by telling the story of your country. You can be famous by exposing the beauty of our country. And you can be famous by doing what is right, composing right music, and promoting moral values.
Thank you very much, Dr. And I want to bring in June. And June, what is your view when you listen to what the government is saying? And from where I sit, I kind of hear a lot of we will, and not so much we have. What do you feel when it comes to the preparation of the next generation of creatives and just making sure that it's actually a reality, not another set of pledges that just gather dust on the shelves?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I'll start by saying that I think, as I mentioned earlier, the first thing is that we are happy there was recognition. I think there's been a lot of reaction, of course, from the creative sector, and as you mentioned earlier, it's much wider than music or film, which seems to be the two that take the bulk of the conversation a lot of the time. But the ecosystem is much larger. As you alluded to at the beginning in your intro. So I think the recognition was something that we needed, because at the end of the day, the human aspect is something we shouldn't forget. Even as we speak about the business component, these are human beings who are struggling right now. There's a mental health issue right now for a lot of them who are depressed and not being able to see what the future holds for them. And I think these 19-year-olds, these next generation members of our society who are looking to see what decisions we make and how it will impact their decisions. This is not 40 years ago when people had to be rebels to enter the creative sector and not enter one of the more established industries. We have proven as a society that there is a place for creative and cultural industries, for the works that are produced, for the way we enjoy them. The market is what decides what we create. And nobody who is sitting in their homes right now can say they have not spent a large portion of their time in the last 3 months consuming content that creatives have created. Whether it's on your Instagram post or whatever it is, there are guys who literally just taken their phone and created content. And I always imagine that the next generation are watching to see what we do, the decisions that we make, the promises that we make, and their implementation. I think to add on to that, we have a lot of resources. I believe Samina alluded to that as well, mentioned that earlier. We have the public radio stations, the public TV stations. We have the newspapers, for example, that could also be used to pass on the message that there's a free, a waiver of the registration, for example, for those of the artists and the creatives in distress, with whom the stimulus fund could help. I think finally, in terms of the market and the next generation, we've talked a lot about technology. And I also think that for a lot of the other art forms, technology may not be that big a deal. It could be accessing materials. It could be for the fashion industry, for example, who are almost manufacturing. There could be other incentives that we should benefit from. So I think I hear goodwill. I've seen progress. I do think that there is room for more and more engagement. And even for those who are listening in, who are in the private sector, I think we have fed the corporate events. We have fed brands with music and with art to be able to appeal to their customers. So I think that appeal for them is also important, because we've been a large part of the entire ecosystem. And I think that we shouldn't forget.
All right, thank you very much, June. And time is really not on our side. There's so much we can talk about. But Madam CS, I want to bring you in just as a matter of what commitment are you making in your capacity as the CS who's in charge of culture and heritage, that the people watching, the creatives and the upcoming, the established, name it, can actually hold on to, that you can give them a pledge in 30 seconds. What can you give to them?
Well, I think that, as June has said, there's clarity now that we are working very, very closely together. And as I've said again, I think there is no shortcut to that. There's no way that we can engage them if where they are. So we need that kind of engagement from them. As I said again, for registration. As far as government is concerned, I think that we realize and we recognize and we support the potential that this sector has. As I've told you, it's 6% of our GDP. I think with support, with the development of the ecosystem, with ensuring that we have market access for them, not just in this country, but through our regional agreements, through our international agreements, access for them to other parts of the world. I think AGOA did amazingly well. I think through the FTA negotiations, we already have commitment from the Ministry of Trade that is something that is on their table. And so basically there is total commitment, I think, from government. We love our creatives. I think there is absolutely no other way of describing our relationship with them. We want to be more supportive. We want to plan for them. We have an additional amount in our budget this year. I mean, we never had 2 billion in the Department of Culture, so government has clearly shown its determination to support the creative sector, and it has shown its commitment. The 100 million fund that was given to us by His Excellency the President, I think if you wanted to look at commitment, that truly is commitment. No other country has done that so far. And so I don't think we should be talking about determination. We also don't make pledges. We actually act, right, in supporting the creatives. And so I think that the falsehood that's always created, that government, it's pledges, it's promises, and nothing is done, that's entirely untrue. And I think that George and June have put that to rest very well. We communicate, we work together, we support each other. As you've seen, George has been extremely supportive. June has recognized what government is doing. And so I think that it's not business as usual, it's business unusual right now. And so I think that has to be acknowledged even by you, Dan, that we're doing things differently now, and that there is a lot of evidence to show that things have changed.
All right, Madam CS, we have to close this, but in an actual 20 seconds, there are those who would want to get part of this 100 million shillings, but probably their style of art, their style of creativity may actually have criticism towards government. Do they still stand a chance?
Absolutely, let them apply.
Okay.
I don't think that we are shy of criticism, as long as that criticism also includes a solution to what needs to be done. So absolutely, they should apply. I also maybe in passing would talk about the DJs who have expressed a concern.
Yes, the DJs. What should
and
they pay or not?
to tell them that tell them that we will work together. I think that they have already been told by the Ministry of ICT what needs to be done. They should know that we support them. We know that they have been extremely supportive during this period of the COVID pandemic, and so we will do our best to resolve the issues that they have, to make sure. And they are not against, in the conversations that I've had, they are not against making payments, as long as there's clarity on what those payments should be.
Okay.
And so we'll work with them to make sure that they can continue producing.
Okay, and I think because this conversation is not exhaustive, we can't complete it here. If we could just get a commitment that we can get a follow-up interview with you, just to get this kind of things sorted out. Sure. Thanks for joining us. We've been having Amina Mohammed, the CS for Sports, Culture and Heritage, and we've also had the KFCB CEO, Ezekiel Mutua. We've had the Hever Fund managing partner, that is George Gashara, and we have June Gashui, who is an advocate of the High Court and the founder of JGIP Consultants. Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, on tonight's NLF, Nation Leadership Forum. Thank you for joining us, viewers, and also for those of us who've been speaking online. We shall look at your feedback and see how to put it to the CS. She's committed to us that she's going to give us another opportunity to speak to her. Thank you once again. Have yourself a good night. I hand you over to Smriti Vidyarthi in a few minutes with NTV Tonight.